Welcome everybody to our coalition meeting again, our annual one every month. Again, we don't have a ton of people in the audience, so hopefully a lot of people are going to watch from home. Tonight's topic is the Child Advocacy Center. I haven't had a lot to do with the Child Advocacy Center from a law enforcement standpoint as the sheriff, other than we're on the board. But I can tell you that I was a detective who did forensic interviews a long time ago, and this would have been a godsend to have them doing this stuff instead of us as law enforcement doing it. Not that we ever did it wrong or anything, but their setup is just much better, and they're probably better at it. So I'm not going to talk much about them. They can come up and introduce themselves and their bios and that kind of thing, and then they can take the show from there. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much.
I'll give you a call.
I don't know where a good place to stand is. Anywhere? Thanks, Joe. All right. Well, thanks for having us tonight. I'm Cheyenne Orcutt. I'm the manager at the Child Advocacy Center. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself right away.
Yep, I'm Tiffany Thompson, a forensic interviewer at the CAC.
Yeah, so we were asked just to come and give you a little bit of information about what we do and why we exist and all that kind of stuff. So certainly let us know if you have questions throughout, but I think we'll have some time at the end as well to go over those. All right, so first I'll just talk a little bit about like why child advocacy centers exist. The first center was developed in 1985 in Huntsville, Alabama, and the whole reason that really why the CAC model was developed is because a district attorney realized that the human services and the criminal justice systems weren't really working together effectively. So really the CAC model, the biggest component of the CAC model is that multidisciplinary team, or the MDT response. So I'll talk more about that, and we'll talk more about that throughout our whole presentation. But first center was in 1985 in Alabama. There are just under 900 nationally or internationally. We have currently 12 CACs that are either in development or actively seeing kids. Back in 2016, when we were in our development stages at the beginning of 2016, there were 7. So that tells you about just the rapid expansion of CACs and the knowledge that we're building about the model. So like I said, I think there's 12 now, either currently operating or in development here in Minnesota. Best practice standards for interviewing, advocacy, mental health, and medical. So we are nationally accredited by the National Children's Alliance. And for that, we have to meet 10 different standards of how we really serve kids. Really, they are a minimum standard, and we strive for best practices. But they are about being trauma-informed, person-centered, and really making sure that we're meeting the kids' needs. Why CACs exist? We want to decrease trauma to the child and the family, so we really want this whole multidisciplinary team to come together, coordinate their efforts, and really prevent the kid and the family from having to go from place to place and tell person after person after person about what's happened to them. So when we coordinate services, it also eliminates the potential for the kid or the family to really fall through the cracks and not get the services that they need. So again, we talk about this MDT, and we'll talk about it, like I said, throughout our presentation, but the MDT response is really the core of the CAC model. So we coordinate and integrate services of those MDT members. Our center is very child-friendly. As you can see in the photo there, our waiting area is pretty colorful, and we've got that theme throughout the center. We do that so that kids feel safe and comfortable. You'll notice if you ever come to the center, our doors are locked. People can't just be coming in freely, not only to respect their privacy, but also so that the kid knows that they're safe, and we only allow people there that we want to be there. And then that last point, like I said, we're connecting kids and their families to those necessary services to make sure that they're not falling through the cracks and that they're getting the services that they need. The multidisciplinary team, as I've talked about, these are most of our MDT partners. You can see child protection, law enforcement, prosecution of the county attorney's office, medical, mental health, and victim advocacy. Our forensic interviewer is not up here, but they're certainly part of the team in almost every case. And depending on each case, we might have additional MDT professionals as well. So it really is a case-by-case scenario. Why child advocacy centers exist is because of adverse childhood experiences. So last month, I believe our medical director, Jerry Jacobson, was here to talk about adverse childhood experiences. So I won't go in detail about the study, but really the study was really about obesity and looking at adults who were severely obese, helping them lose weight. After they had lost the weight, they were quickly gaining it back. And so what the study really showed is that they needed to look at more of the relationship between physical health and mental health and why these people couldn't keep off the weight. So instead of asking the question, what's wrong with you and why can't you keep off this weight, they were instead turning to ask, what has happened to you? And so they were finding that most of the participants had some sort of childhood trauma. And that's really why we exist at the CAC. Centricare a few years back really started asking themselves, what are we doing about ACEs and what are we doing really to prevent childhood trauma leading to poor health outcomes? And so what are we doing really for early intervention and what are we doing for prevention? And so an ACEs collaborative was developed in Centricare, and through that, Centricare approached Stearns County. At the same time, the Minnesota Children's Alliance, which is our state chapter, realized that there was a hole in central Minnesota. And so if and when kids needed specialized medical care and things like that, or an interviewer wasn't available, kids would have to travel down to the metro area to get a forensic interview or an exam. So all of those things kind of collided at the same time, late 2015, early 2016, and that's really how our CAC was developed. So like I said, we know that childhood trauma really is linked to poor health outcomes later in life. And when we talk about poor health outcomes, we're not just talking about mental health, things like substance abuse, suicide attempts, depression, things like that, but we're also talking about physical health. Like I said, with obesity, you can see up there, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, all of those kind of things. So it really is something that, demands our attention. And mitigating the effects of ACEs, again, that's why we exist. The CAC model and what we do kind of on a day-to-day will go in depth about the services that we provide. But we're offering a trauma-informed approach to these kids and providing that early intervention after they've made a disclosure, and supporting them through that disclosure. So we know that what determines if if an event is traumatic for a child or not is really the response that they receive once they have disclosed. So if a child discloses to a parent who then takes action, reports it, and then, they come to the CAC for an interview and they feel like they're believed and they feel like they're heard, and they're not having to tell the story over and over and over again, that really can boost their resiliency and really, like I said, make it not as traumatic, hopefully. So. Minnesota statistics, so in 2017, Minnesota received almost 91,000 reports of child maltreatment. As you can see, almost 8,000 reports of sexual abuse alone. When we take it more locally, Stearns County Human Services, you can see from 2017 to 2019, there's a big jump in the number of reports. So it continues to increase year by year. We don't have the breakdown of sexual abuse versus physical abuse or anything like that for Stearns County specifically, but we know that only a fraction of kids that are abused actually disclose, and then of those, only a certain amount are actually reported. So these numbers really don't even paint the full picture of what's occurring in our state or even locally in our community. Almost 80% of the reports made in 2017 were made by mandated reporters, so that's where we really care about our law enforcement professionals and our school personnel and those kind of people who are seeing kids on a day-to-day basis and the importance of them making those reports. All right, our CAC statistics, We have seen 874 cases, or that's how many cases have been referred to us since we opened in September of 2016. The breakdown here is the reason for the referral, so it doesn't account for the actual types of abuse that we know kids experience, if that makes sense. So a kid may come in for a sexual abuse allegation, and so that's what we have documented here, but throughout their time at the CAC, they may disclose additional types of abuse, like not only was I sexually abused, but also physically abused, or I've experienced neglect as well. So this is just the reason for the referral. What we actually see is quite a bit more. Referrals to our center. Referrals do have to come from either human services or law enforcement, and there has to be an active investigation. We do get calls quite frequently from caregivers who are concerned that their child may be being abused. We get calls from other service providers, other medical providers, people in the community who are, again, concerned about a child. We do offer them consultation, and we offer to support them as best we can. When caregivers call us, we try to get them in touch with someone to make that mandated report, or we ask if we can make that report for them. But we can't actually see a child without a direct referral from law enforcement or human services. Referrals are accepted for kids ages 0 to 18, as well as vulnerable adults or people who experience developmental delays. And we're open Monday through Friday from about 8 to 4:30. We also have an after-hours line, so people can always call us and leave us messages. We do have an established protocol with our St. Cloud Hospital Emergency Trauma Center. So if someone does come there for sexual assault or sexual abuse after hours, most often those cases can wait to be seen by the Child Advocacy Center the next day. And again, we then can convene the whole MDT and make sure that the kid gets all the services in one place at one time. Yeah. Thank you.
So, as I said, my name is Tiffany Thompson, and I am one of the forensic interviewers at the Child Advocacy Center. I have been there for just a little over a year. Prior to that, my background is in law enforcement, and I was a law enforcement officer for about 17 years. During that time, I was a school resource officer and in investigations. So I worked a number of child abuse cases to include physical abuse, neglect, and sexual assault. I was fortunate enough to be one of the officers who was involved in the development from the law enforcement perspective of the CAC, and so I can echo what Sheriff Soika says about how this would have been a godsend had we had one here locally for all of these years. So we're very, very lucky and fortunate to have it here today, and I feel very fortunate to be part of this amazing program and team. The forensic interview, which is my role, obviously is a good part of it, is one of the, I guess, first things that a child will experience, not the first thing that they'll see when they come to the CAC, and you saw the room and the lobby, very colorful, very child-friendly. It's intentionally set up and designed to make them feel safe and secure, despite what they might be coming for, if they're kind of struggling with some feelings or emotions about what they've disclosed or what they've talked about or experienced. So forensic interview is a child-centered, developmentally appropriate, neutral conversation, essentially. It's conducted by people who have been formally trained in forensic interviewing. So there are a number of other law enforcement officers in the area who are also trained as forensic interviewers. We do allow them to come to the CAC and conduct their own forensic interviews if I'm unavailable, or if they would like to conduct their own. Otherwise, I am there as part of the multidisciplinary team. The style of interview that I am trained in is referred to as corner house. There's a number of nationally accredited forensic interview protocols that interviewers can be trained in, and I have some additional training in some of those various interview protocols, but all of them are based upon a similar foundation that is accredited and approved by the National Children's Alliance. So when I meet with the child at the CAC, I'm oftentimes greeting them in the lobby, and that is the very first point of contact, and also very important and crucial that I continue to remain neutral with them. My conversation with them is stemming from things that they offer to me. And so the style of conversation is non-leading. Some of the follow-up questions that I would ask children after they've offered information about why they might be coming or what they might have experienced is just as a method to try and elicit further detail about something that they've already talked about, so as not to suggest anything that did not happen. The interview is evidentiary in nature, so it is audio and video recorded. That recording is provided to law enforcement and or human services, depending on the type of investigation that it is, and that is utilized as evidence that can be admitted in court. In addition to that, as you can see, this is one of our interview rooms. It is very stark, maybe is the word, intentionally so, because we are there to discuss something. We don't want to have too many distractionary devices. We don't want to have too many bright colors or things that might be distracting to one child but might be calming to another, so we do try to remain very neutral. And when we have referrals coming into the center, if there are people who provide us information about a certain type of child would really benefit from having a conversation that involves a certain fidget type spinner or gadget or something that calms them while they're talking, we'll provide that. And so we still are very accommodating to make the best possible outcome for the child that's involved. The MDT, the rest of the MDT members, so law enforcement, human services, the attorney's office, sometimes representatives from mental health, and who else am I missing? I feel like I'm missing some medical, and on occasion advocacy will be in the room and they will be watching this interview. The majority of the time the child will not even see any of these individuals, which is really important. In the past, and from my experience as a law enforcement officer, there would be situations where I would conduct an interview with a child, and a couple weeks later they would be met by child protection, and then they would have to talk about their situation all over again. And then they may have to go further down the process with the investigation or the court process and speak with somebody from the county attorney's office all over again. And all of these parties involved are very well intentioned in wanting the best for the child and for the family. However, many can imagine how traumatizing that might be, how stressful, not to mention some of the discrepancies that will enter the case as it proceeds through through court. We also utilize anatomical drawings or anatomical dolls as a means to help describe or demonstrate something. On occasion, children don't have language or words for types of things that they're talking about, and so we accommodate them by utilizing the drawings or the dolls to help point to something that maybe happened on their bodies, to help identify a location on their body or how a body was positioned during a particular incident. And so quite frequently actually we'll utilize those interview aids to help understand something that took place and help give them some language about what they experienced. The goal is to limit the number of conversations, like I mentioned before, to cut down on the number of individuals speaking to them, but also for me to try and get as much possible detail as I can from that child in one setting, so then we don't have to continue to bring them back over and over again. There are occasions if a child has experienced ongoing abuse, neglect, or what have you, where we may intentionally break up a conversation. If they have certain developmental needs or social emotional disabilities or anything that we need to look into to where they are going to be much more successful to have these conversations over a period of 3 sessions or 2 sessions or whatever it might be, we'll have those discussions with the MDT members to decide how best to get the information from the child. Factors influencing their response to abuse. So as you can imagine, a little bit of what we talked about with ACEs, kids will come to the CAC and have a whole host of emotions. They may be anything from very flat and calm and very stoic about what they've experienced, and they may talk about a very traumatizing, scary, unimaginable incident that occurred one time or 100 times. Other kids may be very emotional and crying and upset or need to take a break, not want to talk at all. And a lot of that has to do with Obviously the ACEs and the other things that you can see on the list here, but some of their own feelings. A lot of times, the offenders that children have experienced are known parties. It's very uncommon, or it's not the norm that this will be a stranger that they've never met in their life before. And so there's a lot of give and take with their own emotions about how they feel around that, and some guilt, and some of that has to do with the reaction for their family when they make this disclosure. And so if a parent is very reactionary and starts shouting, or not even necessarily saying that they don't believe what they're saying to them, but if a child just notices that a caregiver or a relative or somebody who's familiar with what they've just talked about is really emotional and upset and crying, they'll internalize that, and then it can affect their ability to want to talk about it, to want to share further detail, and quite honestly, it may even cause them to completely recant and then say that it either didn't happen or refuse to talk about it. And so that's something that we always keep in mind when we're having the MDT pre-interview meetings. We'll discuss the whole family unit, who else is aware of the disclosure, how have the reactions been as far as we know, and then we will also talk about that throughout the whole case process among one another. While the interview is taking place, we have a child and family advocate, and so this is her office. Usually she and I will greet the family together, and when I take the child back to the interview room, our advocate will bring the caregivers who accompany the child to the CAC, and they will meet in her office to just have a conversation with them about where they're at, what they know, and to help identify or address any sort of barriers to the case, or any of their own questions about the process, either at the CAC, with regard to law enforcement, human services, involvement, court, and anything else that they can benefit from to assist them to then be able to support the child in a healthy manner. They can accompany families to court. They can help make necessary mental health referrals for the child and the family as a whole. They can do anything from provide gas cards or grocery cards or things like that to help alleviate some of the financial stress that the family might experience if a child now has ongoing therapy treatments or appointments or what have you. Anything that they see as a barrier to help support the child and the family unit, the advocate does an amazing job. In my biased opinion, I think probably one of the toughest jobs of everybody on the MDT. Anything else to point out about that, Cheyenne?
I would just mention that our advocate really starts the relationship even prior to the family coming into the CAC. So the referent usually sets up the date and time of the appointment and communicates that with the family. But then our advocate will call the family and say, hey, do you have any questions about your visit here? And can kind of explain some of that before the family really even gets to our center. But then that relationship is established so that it's not a scary thing for them to do either by bringing their kid in. So yeah, our advocate does great work.
Yeah, for sure. She will walk families through harassment restraining order process, orders for protection, no contact orders, make connections between the family and legal aid if that's something that they would benefit from or are looking for. A whole variety of, the list goes on, and there's things that we don't even know about yet because it's just constantly evolving and being added. So she's got a whole heap of responsibilities, and she's amazing at coordinating all of that. Another thing that in my former career as a law enforcement officer, there are plenty of advocacy services around the community, but I really do think that they're an unsung hero in a way within these cases, because it is to see the amount of work and effort that the advocates put in to keep the families on board, if you will, and completely on task with following the case through, making sure that their needs are met, that they're supporting their child's needs, and that everybody is properly cared for. She does an amazing job, and so it's really great to have her aboard. The medical exam. So if we were to, on average, I suppose, the majority of the cases are, lobby, check-in, just like you would any other professional appointment. The interview with myself, our advocate, And then most often, on average, there will be a medical exam offered. We offer medical exams to all children who come to the CAC, whether it's evidentiary for the investigation or otherwise. And it is a free medical exam. When I say free, I mean free to the family. They will not have to provide any sort of money out of their own pocket. There are occasions where insurance may be billed, or per statute, certain counties that are investigating the incident will be charged, but the family who comes to the CAC will not have to pay a dime out of their pocket for any of the services that they receive with regard to the medical exam at the CAC. We've taken a lot of care, and Cheyenne especially from day one has worked very hard and diligently to make sure that certain processes are in place to ensure that families who, you can imagine, have a lot on their plate, especially when they're going through something like this, if they get a bill in the mail, that can be earth-shattering, and what do we do with this? And so we still tell families, if we have missed some little loophole somewhere, please tell us, and we will make sure that you do not have to pay for that particular bill. So, the medical exam, like I said, is offered to every child who comes to the CAC. It is non-invasive. It is still child-focused like everything else at the CAC. This is your standard medical exam room with some, colorful wall hangings. I think there's like a little ceiling scene thing. I'm not in there very often because I'm usually doing an interview. And Legos and any sort of distraction type toy or anything to comfort a child that might be a little bit nervous. It is voluntary. We do not force kids to submit to a medical exam. And then the bottom term on there is a colposcope, and that's the, if I can make this work, technology. This little thing here, it's a super powered digital camera on a microscope, essentially. I'm doing my best to represent our amazing medical team right now, which I am not a medical team member, but they are all specially trained and they do amazing work with all of the kids who come to the CAC. And so this colposcope with the high-powered camera is something that is used to take very sensitive, by way of quality, digital photographs of the genital area or region of children if needed to gather evidence to be used for the case. And so there are people who may have these ideas, whether it's something they've seen on TV or heard from past practice years and years ago. There is no insertion into bodies. There is no, it is not like when an adult female would go to her own doctor for her own pelvic exam. It is night and day from those situations, and so it is non-invasive, child-focused, trauma-focused, and completed by very specially trained medical professionals for these specific types of cases and for pediatric patients. A good majority of the time, the medical exam is just a conversation. And so you can see that what's highlighted is kind of the big ticket items that we're looking to assure families and children that they're okay and to reassure them. Despite what they've gone through, their body is normal, they are still healthy, they are still growing, they are okay. They don't have to be worried about anything that somebody may have told them as a result of what they've endured, that they are going to be all right. And so a lot of times the medical exam may just involve a lengthy conversation about their health and their development. There is testing for sexually transmitted infections if it's indicated, if we believe that there may be a need for that. Another thing that is really nice at our present location is that we do not give any shots where we're at, and so it's really nice that we get to tell kids that's a big ticket thing for them. When kids come in and we say something about, let's see the doctor, and then, there are no shots here. If you have to cross the street to go over down the road a little bit, I can't guarantee that. But here in this space, there are no shots given, and you can check in with the nurse and the doctor and ask any questions that you want to. Another thing that I think is so valuable about that, again, and there are other law enforcement officers in the room here right now who can probably attest to this. When a child has just finished talking about an abuse scenario, or talked about years of neglect or physical abuse or sexual abuse, it is in the forefront of their mind. And so for them to just simply walk down the hallway and now meet with medical professionals, they oftentimes will talk about other things that have happened to them, and then that will also garner things for the case that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise had evidence about if this was a follow-up medical appointment that was completed months later. Sometimes when Cheyenne mentioned that with our statistics, kids who refer to the CAC for like a sexual abuse incident that happened at home, and through the course of the interview they may say, well, and then I got bit, and here's the mark, or something like that. They can then be looked at by the doctor or the nurse, and if there's any sort of scars or marks or anything like that, we'll be able to photograph that, and that will become evidence of the case. Very, very valuable for human services and law enforcement to be able to have that kind of information, especially when it's offered by a child and not asked if it happened. When they just say it of their own accord, then that's very valuable. Anything else from medical? Mental health services, so I mentioned that we are able to make necessary mental health referrals both within the Centric Care Health System, but then also through linkage agreements that the CAC has with other mental health providers. We also have two integrative behavioral health psychotherapists, IBH workers, who are able to come to the CAC at the time of the referral, at the time that the child is there, to help with any sort of on-the-spot therapies, to assist in any sort of bridging counseling treatments or therapy from the time that they're at the CAC until they can get to a regular therapist that they would develop a relationship with. And so that is very, that's a great thing to have them, to be able to just on the fly call, and they'll come over and check in children to make sure that they're doing all right.
I would just mention, similarly to the medical exam process, families will not get a bill for any of the IVH services that they get the day of their visit at the CAC. So, well, I should just say, just overall, the forensic interview, the advocacy, the medical exam, and the mental health services, anything that they receive from us the day of their visit, or even ongoing for advocacy, we're not charging for any of that stuff. So, just note that.
Another great benefit to having them on board with the CAC program is that not only will they meet with the children who've been referred, but they've met with caregivers who have come as well to help assist them. Reporting suspected abuse. As Cheyenne mentioned, a great number of child maltreatment reports in our area, 80% have been made by mandated reporters, and so this just highlights the stipulations about a verbal report being made immediately, not to exceed 1 day, 24 hours. The written report to follow within 72, can be reported to child protection or law enforcement in which the child resides or where it is occurring. A lot of times people get hung up on, well, I'm not sure if they're going to screen it in, or it might not be too bad. And one thing that I would always tell mandated reporters and caregivers alike, whether you're a mandated reporter or not, if you think that something's not right in the life of a child and you've got some suspicions and it's making the little hairs on your neck stand up, make the report. Nobody will ever be punished for making a report or providing information, and it might get screened in, it might not get screened in, but a lot of times it could be that last puzzle piece to a bigger picture that they've been waiting for, to be able to really get some necessary interventions for the family, for the child, and then to make everybody healthy again. The bottom line, obviously, is there are certain locations that will dictate that you are to report to human services or law enforcement. So this is statute language that you can report to one or the other, but always defer to what your current location's policy and procedures are, just to protect yourselves. The one thing that I will tell people is something that comes up often is, well, I knew that it was already reported and I was providing therapy and I knew that it was reported because that's how I got the referral, and so I figured they already knew about it when they disclosed further details. If you really don't know for certain, make the report. You will never get in trouble, again, I'll echo, for making a report, but a lot of times if I'm interviewing a child, one of the questions I'll ask is, tell me who else you've talked to about this. And if they say, I told my mom, and I told my friend's mom, and I told my teacher and my doctor, and we only have 2 people who we're aware of who know about this because they're the ones who made the report, or that's who brought the child there. Those people are going to be questioned, and that's how people will get in trouble for not making reports, especially if they're mandated to report. Reporting suspected abuse. What if a child discloses? So minimal facts. Obviously, stay calm. Like we said, or like I said earlier, a lot of times children are looking for the reaction, and if somebody gets really excited or starts sobbing or yells or oh my gosh, children will see that and they'll reflect on that and think, I've just upset them. They don't believe me. Oh my gosh, what did I do? Kids will make purposeful and accidental disclosures. And so if they make an accidental disclosure because we see something on TV and somebody is being mistreated, and they're like, well, that happened to me. And someone's like, what? Tell me more about that. And then they may think like, oops, I said too much. And then pull it back in, and we may not be able to get any more information from them about that to ensure that it's not happening to them at home, or that it's not happening on and on and on, or that it's something that has never been reported. So that initial reaction is very important, to just stay calm and get minimal facts. What is it? So I think sometimes, and everybody is well-intentioned because they want to make sure that they're getting the best possible information from a child, but sometimes it's what can kind of taint it, I suppose, because of the style of questioning. So if a child says, I was hit, who hit you? Tell me where they hit you. And when we say where did it happen, where were you when it happened? So was it at home? Was it at school? Where were you? And that's for jurisdiction purposes, so then we get the right law enforcement agency and human services agency involved. And when was the last time it happened? So we do have a statute of limitations in Minnesota still for sexual abuse, we have to take into account how long ago something happened. A lot of times with kids nowadays, if they're saying something, it doesn't really come into play much, but it is still important for us to know. That also comes into play for if there's any sort of evidence collection, if we think that there's anything that could be gathered maybe from their body, from the location it occurred, photographed or what have you. And then set the stage for the possibility of a forensic interview. So what I would tell people is, if there's a child, especially for people who are in classrooms, if they're talking about a specific topic and kids are like, last night at home, this happened. Remain calm and thank you for telling me about that, and I'd love to talk with you more about that over here. And then, when you get the what, who, where, and when was the last time, there is somebody that I'd love for you to talk to about that. And their job is to talk to kids about all of those things and to help keep them safe. And would it be okay for you to talk to them maybe someday down the road or in the future or later on? Yep, so keep it open for them and just let them know that there is somebody who might want to chat with them and ask more questions, and then go from there with making the mandated report. And thank them for telling. Some of that language comes from a prevention curriculum called Safe and Strong, and Officer Lundquist is also one of the educators who went to the Train the Trainer with Cheyenne and I. And so it is preschool, kindergarten up to 5th and 6th grade, prevention curriculum for what used to be referred to as good touch, bad touch. We now refer to as safe, unsafe, or unsure. And it is a brief, either one one-hour session or 2 30-minute sessions of a little bit of information. It's interactive. We talk through some scenarios where kids are able to decide, is this good, safe, bad, unsafe, or not sure? And we talk through that with the kids. We talk through that talk with them about how would you respond if we decide it's unsafe, or if we're unsure, and who would you talk to if you do need further help. It also, it addresses in a very child appropriate or developmentally appropriate way the idea of consent. The older kids we discussed briefly about sexual abuse, and tattling versus telling, and then identify adults in their school, at home, and adults who are outside of school and home that they can look to talk to about those things. So that is some of that language that comes from thank you for telling me and I'd like to talk with you later, so. And then these are some of the outside resources. We did bring some handouts on understanding sexual behaviors in children, broken down by ages, some victim grooming and manipulation, warning signs, and then a recommended children's books on body safety, just some picture books that talk to kids about body safety, and a couple of them address consent a little bit, and then just some general overview about our program. So with that, any questions? Cheyenne, anything else to add?
No, I was just gonna mention, a lot of the phone calls that we get from caregivers, like I said earlier, we get quite a bit of, phone calls from caregivers who are worried my kid is being sexually abused, and so then we ask them a little bit more about that, why do you think that, what is happening? They talk about some of, actual normal childhood sexual development, and so when we can help them kind of tease that out and talk to them about what is normal sexual development in kids and what is more abnormal and then what is concerning, really we can alleviate a lot of their stress and anxiety about what is just normal childhood sexual behavior. So we use that a lot, and then we have another booklet that we can give out to them that goes a little bit more in depth about normal versus abnormal, like I said, or concerning. Yeah, I think that was all I was going to mention about that, but a lot of people usually ask us about funding and how we're sustained if we're not charging families for our services. So we do have a couple major grants that help sustain us and pay for our operational expenses. We do get a couple, or we do have some donors from out in the community that do help us out. Stearns County has given us some money every year since we've been open. Centricare really just covers the deficit that we kind of create, which they are happy to do, but we're always looking for sustainable funds, obviously, and donors and opportunities for fundraising and things like that. So that's usually a question I get.
Where are you located?
What's the best landmark?
By the Sartell Water Tower? Is there more than one?
Yes, there is.
Top White, by Orthopedic Sports Center,
Medical
Health
Arts Center
Partners.
down there,
yeah,
back by McDonald's.
the Medical Metropolis
Yeah.
area.
And you'll never notice a big sign that says that we're there, and we have that. We don't have that purposefully. We're in a little building with a CDI clinic and a behavioral health clinic that is Centricare's also, but we purposely don't have a big sign broadcasting that we're there, again, just for the privacy of the families that we serve. We do have, this is something I guess kind of unique about our space, we do have two entrances. We have the family and the child that come in one entrance purposely, and then our team enter through another entrance, so that if the kid and family are there and the team members are entering, we've had up to 20 people, MDT members, for a case. And so if you could imagine being the kid sitting there and then having 20 professionals coming in, how intimidating that could be. So we purposely have two entrances, and then that also allows the team to come in and out when they need to without worrying about us letting them in the door. Like I said, we're locked purposely. Oh yes, you can, I'll let you talk about that. So we have a local organization called Pockets of Hope that is actually here in Sartell. And it really began with 3 women who wanted to put together something for kids that were entering foster care. As they could see the need when kids were entering foster care, sometimes all they had to bring with them is what they were wearing. So they didn't have things like hygiene items or additional clothing, a blanket, things like that. So this group started, I wanna say, just before the CAC opened in 2016. And they have been providing us a backpack for every kid that we serve at the CAC, regardless if they're in foster care or not. So in those backpacks, they usually have a blanket, some sort of stuffed animal, an activity or two, hygiene items like a brush, shampoo, deodorant, and then different activities, like I said, dependent on the age of the kid that we're giving it to. Yeah, so they have been phenomenal. We give that to the kid purposefully when they are on their way out of the door instead of when they first get there. But a lot of kids have mentioned how happy it has made them. I'll just say that. One kid in particular, it just made her day because she said she had never had her own brush. I think we were talking about that earlier today. So yeah, it really brings a positive light to what could be a tough day for them. So we also have a clothing closet, and as Tiffany said, we can give out some gas cards or grocery vouchers, things like that for the families. So. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.